It was 4:40 in the morning on the back pond, and the man fishing 30 feet to my left had pulled in 5 fish before I had wet a line. I was 26 years old. I had a brand new rod that cost me $61, which in the spring of 1985 was close to a week of groceries. He had a cane pole and a coffee can, and every few minutes that cane pole would bend, and he would swing another bluegill or another little channel cat up onto the bank like the pond owed him money. I finally walked over. I asked him what he was using. He didn't say bait. He held up his hook, and wrapped around the shank of that hook, neat as a watch spring, was a single turn of thin copper wire. He said, 11 cents of wire. He said, the fish find it before they find your worm. That man was Eli Yoder, and that morning cost me everything I thought I knew about fishing. I want to be honest with you right at the front, because that is the only way I know how to do this. I am not going to tell you copper wire is magic. I am going to tell you exactly what it does, exactly what it does not do, exactly where the idea came from, and exactly how to tie it on tonight for about 11 cents. The whole thing costs less than the worms you already bought. And by the end of this, you are going to understand why a technique that sat in a Penn State Extension bulletin in 1966 quietly disappeared from the catalogs, while the tackle counter filled up with $80 electronics that do a piece of what a bent coffee can and a coil of copper did for free. So let me give you the method first, and then I will earn it. You take a length of bare copper wire, not coated, not enameled, bare. 22 gauge is what I use, which is about the thickness of 2 human hairs twisted together. You can buy a 100-foot spool of it at any hardware store for around $4, and that 100 feet will outlast you. You cut a piece about 2 inches long. You wrap it snug around the shank of your hook right behind the eye, 4 or 5 turns, and you leave a short tag end sticking out, maybe a 1/4 inch. That tag end matters, and I will tell you why in a minute. You bait the hook like you always would with a worm or a bit of cut bait, and you fish it like you always would. That is the whole method. 11 cents, 2 minutes, no batteries. Now, what is actually happening down there? When 2 different metals sit in water that carries any minerals at all, and pond water always does, they make a tiny electrical cell, a battery, a very, very weak one. Your steel hook is one metal, the copper wire is the other, and the pond water is the bridge between them. The technical word for it is a galvanic couple, and it puts out a small electrical potential, measured in millivolts. We are talking about a current so faint you would never feel it. But a fish is not built like you. A catfish, a carp, a bluegill, they carry sensing organs that read electrical fields in the water down to a level your best meter would struggle with. The catfish especially. Its whole body is a wet antenna. It has been finding food in muddy black water for 40 million years by feeling the faint electrical signature of a living thing, because everything alive leaks a little current. So here is the plain language version of it. That worm on your bare hook gives off a tiny electrical signal on its own. That is part of why live bait outfishes plastic. But a worm on a hook with a copper and steel couple wrapped to it puts off a stronger, steadier signal, a little beacon. And in dark or stained or deep water where the fish cannot see your bait, that beacon is what brings it the last few feet, not from across the lake. I want to be careful with you there. It is not a dinner bell that rings across 40 acres. It is the difference between a fish swimming past your hook in the dark and a fish turning the last 3 feet to find it. In clear, shallow water on a bright day, where the fish can already see everything, it does almost nothing. I will say that again later because it matters. Eli Yoder did not know the word galvanic. He would have laughed at me for using it. What he knew was that his grandfather wrapped copper on hooks on the Pequot Creek, and his grandfather's father did it before him, and every one of them caught fish when the store-bought rigs sat quiet. The knowledge ran down through 4 generations of Lancaster County men who fed their families off a quarter-acre pond, and not one of them could have told you the chemistry. They just knew the pond did not lie. The reason I can tell you the chemistry is that somebody did write it down once. Penn State put out a series called the Aquaculture Extension Research Series, and Bulletin number 31, published in 1966, has a section on what they called electroattraction in warm water species. It is real. You can find it referenced in the Penn State Agricultural Extension Archive at University Park. It described the galvanic effect on hook hardware, and it noted, in the dry way those bulletins always do, that anglers using dissimilar metal terminal tackle reported improved catch rates in turbid water. And then, in 1974, that bulletin was dropped from the extension reprint list. Not banned. Nobody made copper wire illegal. It just stopped being reprinted, stopped being handed out at the county extension office, and slid out of the modern fishing handbooks the same way 100 cheap, durable, unpatentable tricks slid out. You cannot patent a piece of copper wire. There is no margin in it. There is enormous margin in a fish finder. And that is the part I want you to sit with for a second, because it is not a conspiracy, and I am not going to pretend it is one. Nobody in a boardroom decided to bury copper wire. What happened is quieter and in some ways worse. The whole industry simply drifted toward the things it could sell you over and over. A spool of copper you buy once and use for life is a terrible product. A graph that needs a battery, an upgrade, a new transducer, a subscription to the lake maps, that is a wonderful product. So the marketing went where the money was, and the 11-cent trick that any pond keeper knew in 1940 became something your grandfather did that nobody mentions anymore. The knowledge was not outlawed. It was just allowed to disappear while the shelves filled up with what they could ring up twice. Now let me give you the 3 ways I actually rig this. The first method is the simple shank wrap, the one I already gave you. 22 gauge bare copper, 2 inches, 4 or 5 snug turns behind the hook eye, short tag end left proud. The reason for that tag end is contact. You want a little bit of the copper standing off the steel so the water moves around both metals freely. That is for catfish and carp and bullheads, the bottom feeders, the electrical specialists. In stained pond water above 60 degrees, that is my confident rig. The second method is the bead and wire dropper, and this one Eli showed me later on the Pequot in the fall. Instead of wrapping the hook, you take a 3-inch piece of copper and you twist a small loop in the middle, and you slide that loop onto your line about 4 inches above the hook, so the copper rides just above the bait like a little antenna of its own. The advantage is that the bait stays clean and you can move the copper up or down the line to find the depth the fish are reading. In a deep hole, 4 feet of water or more, where the light is gone by mid-afternoon, the dropper outfishes the shank wrap for me about 2 times out of 3. I have run them side by side on the same evening, same pond, same bait, 1 rod each, and I logged it for 3 seasons before I trusted the number. The third method is the one I save for the cold edge of the year, the copper and cork. You wrap the shank like method 1, but you also pinch a tiny bit of cork or foam onto the tag end, so the wire floats the back of your bait up off the mud just slightly. Cold water, The fish are slow, sitting right on the bottom, and a bait that hovers a half-inch up in the faint current zone gets found when a bait buried in the silt does not. That is a March and April rig for me, water in the high 40s to low 50s. 3 methods, 1 spool of wire. Total cost for all of it under $5, and you will be handing that spool to a grandchild someday. Now I owe you the honesty beat, because I told you at the front I would not sell you magic. Here is what copper does not do. It does not work on largemouth bass worth a nickel. Bass are sight and vibration hunters. They hit a moving lure because they see it flash and feel it push water, and their electrical sense is nothing like a catfish's. I wrapped copper on jigs for 2 springs, trying to prove Eli wrong about that because I am stubborn, and I caught exactly the same number of bass I would have caught with bare hooks, which tells you it did nothing. So if you fish bass, this is not your trick. I am not going to dress it up. It also does almost nothing in clear, shallow, bright water. If the fish can already see your bait from 10 feet, it does not need a faint electrical beacon to find the last 3. The copper earns its keep in the dark, in the deep, in the stain, in the muddy spring runoff, in the night. Daytime, gin-clear farm pond, bluebird sky. Do not expect a miracle, because you will not get one, and then you will write the whole thing off. And it would be a shame to throw away a real edge because you tested it in the one place it was never meant to work. And the wire does corrode. That is not a flaw, that is the engine. The copper has to react with the water to make the current, but it means your wrap is good for a few outings, and then you retie. 11 cents. Retie it. A worn green wrap is a dead wrap. Let me tell you about a fellow named Dale, 61 years old, out near Millersburg, Ohio, who wrote to me after I first talked about this. Dale fished a strip mine pond, the kind with that deep, cold, tea-colored water, and he had about given up on it. He wrapped copper, the simple shank method, fished his usual night crawlers in the same 3 spots. He told me the first evening he doubled his best night in a decade. Now I want you to hear what I told Dale, because it is the same thing I am telling you. That pond was not dead. It was deep and dark and full of catfish that were swimming past his bait in water too black to see it. He did not add fish. He let the fish that were already there find what he was already throwing. The copper did not stock his pond. It just rang the dinner bell in the dark. That is the honest size of this thing, and the honest size of it is still plenty. So why does a trick this cheap and this old still work, when so much of what gets sold as a secret is nonsense? Because it is not fighting the fish's nature, it is using it. The catfish was reading electrical fields before there were tackle shops. Eli Yoder's grandfather did not invent that. He just noticed it and bent a piece of wire around it. And then 4 generations of quiet men kept noticing, and one extension agent in 1966 wrote it down before it slipped under. Before I let you go, there is one tweak I held back, the one Eli saved for last. When you wrap the copper, give it a quick rub with a pinch of plain table salt between your fingers first, just enough to brighten the metal and rough it microscopically. A clean, slightly abraded copper surface starts the galvanic reaction faster and stronger than a dull, oxidized one. It is a 10-second thing, and it is the difference between a wrap that is working when your bait hits the water and a wrap that takes 20 minutes to wake up. Bright copper, touch of salt, fish it now. That is the copper wire. 11 cents, 4 generations, 1 extension bulletin that nobody reprints, and a catfish that has been waiting 40 million years to feel it. Next time, I want to take you to the other end of the cheap bait world. to something sitting in your kitchen cupboard right now that a lot of old pond men fished with long before the plastic worm was ever invented, and the tackle counter would just as soon you forgot. I'll see you next time. The pond keeps teaching, and I keep learning. So do you.